Hi, and welcome back to this series where we're going to be making our navigation menu work. And I've got it working right here, actually, just to give you a little preview of what it's going to be looking like. So we're going to be making the hamburger icon change into the X and back when we click on it. And of course, the whole thing is going to slide out and slide back in. We're going to be using ES6 and arrow functions to do this. There's not a lot of JavaScript that has to go into this, so it's a nice little introduction to JavaScript maybe and into arrow functions. I'm going to do my best to explain the difference between the old way of writing it and with arrow functions. And yeah, let's just jump right into it and see how I made this. So I would encourage, if you didn't see the last video, I'd strongly encourage that you go and check it out. So that's where we styled the navigation here. So what I want to do is, we're going to start off, we have my navigation. So I'm going to do a transform, translate X. So X is on the left and right. So I'm going to say negative 100%. So it's going to move it all the way. It's going to take its full width and just move it 100% to the left, which means it will disappear. So let's just refresh that. There we go. So now it's gone. Now what I want is I want that whole thing to be able to slide out. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to have, when we click on this, that the navigation comes out, right? So I'm going to leave this in my navigation styles because it's controlling my navigation. Maybe I could make another partial for it, but I think that makes sense to leave it in here. And I'm going to make a class called nav is open, and actually I'm going to put that down at the bottom, I think, because I'm going to have nav is open. And so when my nav is open, my nav is going to transform, translate X back to 0. So it's going to go back to its original starting point. So I'll save that, and let's go over to my index file here, and on my body we're going to add the class is equal to nav is open. Save, and when I save this it should pop out. There we go, cool. So on my body, if class nav is open is there, my navigation is there, and if we remove nav is open, it's going to disappear. So the functionality in my CSS is there, but now I want to make it work with some JavaScript. So we got to go and do that. So I'm going to make a new folder, and we're just going to call this JS. And in this JS folder, I'll make a new file, and I'm going to split this into two different JavaScript files just for demonstration purposes, but normally you'd probably be better off keeping them in one or using gulp to combine them into one or something like that. So this one's going to be called nav.js, and we'll go over to my index. I'm going to come all the way down, and right here before my body ends, I'm going to put in a script src is equal to js nav.js, and we're going to save. So that should be included now. In this video, I am going to be using ES6, which is the newest way of writing JavaScript. Older browsers don't support it. You can use something like Babel if you want. There'll be a link to that in the description. You can bring that into the gulp build. You could also use Prepros or probably CodeKit to have ES6. It converts it for you into the older way of doing stuff, which was a lot more complicated. But I'll explain a little bit. The only big differences I'm going to be using is I'm going to be using const and I'm going to be using arrow functions. So if you watched or have done any JavaScript tutorials, you probably see var a lot, which is your variable. With ES6, they've added const, do a new line, const, and let. Basically, variable like this had some issues with it in just the way that it was scoped, and this sort of fixes them. Let is a lot like the variable in that you can change what the variable is later on. Whereas writing it like this, it's still creating a variable, but it's a variable that can't be changed. You can't redefine it after. And for the purposes of the videos I'm making now, we're going to be using this one to declare our variables. So what I want to do is make my nav toggle. So I want to do nav toggle is equal to, and now I want to select where is it? I want to select my button, so it should be all the way at the top of my file. I want to select my menu button here. So what I'm going to write is document. So I'm going to look in my document, and I'm going to do a query selector. You might have seen other videos that are using things like get element by ID or by class name and stuff like that. querySelector is a lot easier to use. If you're coming from jQuery, I find it also, it's a little similar to how jQuery worked, where I can do my querySelector and then I just write in here what I want. So this is a class, so it's dot. So I'm selecting a class, and it was, I just forgot the name of it already, menu button. So I'm just going to put menu button. And that's it. I'm also not putting a semicolon at the end. Semicolons aren't required to put in JavaScript, so I'm not going to put them anywhere because it makes my life easier, and you're not going to break anything by not putting them. So just by not putting them anywhere, I know I won't screw up anything. Whereas if you are putting them, you don't want to put one in the wrong spot. So just don't put any. Pretty much the browser just does it all on its own anyway. So now we want to do something with our button. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say my Nav Toggle, and I'm going to add something called add event listener. So this means now it's going to listen for something to happen. There's a lot of different things you can do. In the next one, we're also going to be listening for key down events, but the one you'll probably see the most often is click. So you're always going to put the event itself in quotation marks. So I'm going to say click. And then when I click on the button, I want to do something. So I'm going to put a comma. And now it's, well, what happens when somebody clicks? And in this case, I'm just going to put in an anonymous function. So I'm going to write, and the old way of doing it would have been writing function like that, and then putting in my curly braces, and then writing the function in here. But I said I'm going to be using ES6. So I'm going to use an arrow function because it means less keystrokes. So I have my click. And to do an arrow function, it's pretty simple. I just have to do, I could have just that and then my arrow. And then I could write a really simple thing here on one line, or because this is going to be on multiple lines, I still need to put in my curly braces, and then I can write my function here. So it's a lot shorter to write. And if you only have, if this is empty, so this would normally be like function here. If you're going to have function and it's going to be an empty one, you can have just an underscore instead of having the parentheses. So it's just to save another keystroke. So this here is the exact same thing as writing it click, as writing function, whoops, as writing it like that. So you can see it's a little bit simpler to write, or a little bit faster to write. It also scopes this a little bit differently, if you know what that is. And if you don't worry about it too much. So now that I have this, I want to do something. And let's just check if this is even working. We want to see if it's working. The easiest way to do that is do a console log. So I'm just going to console log, and we're going to console log test. And let's save that. And to see the console, I'm just going to do my inspect element and jump over to console. And now when I click on this, I should see the word test show up there. And there we go. And if I click again, it should come again. You can see here the instances, how many times I've clicked on it. So I know that it's working. Awesome. Now, what do we want to do when we click on it? I don't want to have a little test run. I want something to actually happen. So what I want to actually happen is I want to add the new class that I came up with, nav is open. I want to add this to the body when I click on that. So let's come back to here. And so we want to select the body. Luckily, selecting the body is really easy. Document.body. So I don't have to do a query selector and all of that to get my body. I can just do it like this. And then I want to add a class. So we can access something called the class list. So this is, I'm going to go on my class list, and do I want to do something? So you can add and remove stuff from a class list. So in this case, I want to add, and then in parentheses, I can write what I want to add. And I want to add nav is open. Now, one thing before I save this and we check it out to see if it's working, you'll notice here I put a period and here I didn't put one. Here's a query selector. It's looking through the whole document. It doesn't know what I'm looking for. It could be an ID, a class, a tag. Whereas over here, it knows I'm working with a class. So if I add the period here, it's going to add a class of .nav is open, and it's not going to work. So it's an important distinction to make, because I've made mistakes where I included the period here, something's not working, and it's been 2 hours trying to figure it out, and it's a stupid typo. So I don't want you to run into that same problem. So let's save that file, and let's see if it works. So now when I click, there we go, it popped out. And if we go back to my inspect element, it's going to refresh, so we go back to how it was. And this is really zoomed in. Let's go find my body. So there's my body. So when I click, you can see the class nav is open has been added. Now there's a problem. It's just appearing, and I want it to, I don't want it just to appear. I want it to slide out. So that's nice and easy to do. Let's go back to here. And I'm going to go back up to my original nav where I have my transform, and I'm going to do a transition. And we're going to transition my transform. We're going to do an ease in out, and oops, I misspelled transform. And so we're going to do an ease in out, and it's going to last 250 milliseconds. And I'll save. Let's refresh. And now when I click, it should slide out. There we go. So it's transitioning the transform. It's easing in and out, and it's taking 200. And maybe I should just do an ease in, not ease in out. Oops. Let's just see if that looks nicer. I think I like that better. It sort of speeds up as it goes. Or maybe if it slowed down, started fast and then slowed down. I'm going to go with that one actually. So just an ease out on there. So it goes whoop. Now I also want to be able to close it. And the problem is my button has disappeared. And I want to be able to click on my button to get it to go back. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come on my index and we're going to add in a new div. So here's my button that I'm clicking on. Here's my navigation that's sliding in and out. And then there's the rest of my content. And I want the rest of the content to slide with my navigation. So right here, I'm going to add a div. Div class is equal to container all. Maybe not the best name, but it's kind of descriptive. It's containing all of the content other than my navigation, of course. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to come all the way down. Let's just tab that over. And we're going to close that div. I'll save that. And now what I want to do is I want it to, we'll come back to here. So when my nav is open, my nav is going to transform and translate that much. And I'm also going to have my container all. That's also going to transform. And it's also going to translate X. Now how much it translates here, I'm going to match this number up with this right here. So right now my nav is taking up 80% of the screen. So I'm going to have that be 80%. So let's save and hopefully that works. So I'm going to click and it should slide out. And the only thing here is on my container all, I do need to include a transition. But I don't want it on the nav is open, do I? Transition. I'm just trying to think. No, I don't want it to only be, I want my container all to always have the transition on it, whether this is there or not. Right. Yeah. So I'm just going to come down here and add container all. Just whoops. We're going to add a transition. That's actually, I should make maybe a variable for this, but for now, we'll just copy that. Save, refresh, and that's just check. They should slide out together. There we go. That looks better. Good. We're getting there. Now, the only thing is when I click on it again, it doesn't close. So I want it to close, right? So I could add another thing in here because we have add, and I could also, not close, we could do a remove. So you can remove something from the class list. Or you can also toggle something from a class list. So toggle just means if it's there, remove it, and if it's not there, add it on. So let's save this. So now when I click, it should slide out. And when I click, it should slide back in. Awesome. Look at that. It's working perfectly. Super happy with that. Another thing is the transition, my transition is one of the properties that, not my transition, my translate is one of the properties you can do that should usually always result in smooth animation. So that's good too. Cool, so that's working. Now the last thing is I want this to actually change into an X. So when I click, it turns into an X, and when I click again, it turns back into the hamburger. So what I want to do is I'm going to go back to my index, and right here we have my container all, and there's my button. So my menu button, and I have my SVG in there. So what I want to actually do is add in a second SVG into here. And the SVG I want to be adding is my my X thing. And I didn't realize this when I did the last part, but if I go into my images folder and I go into my close icon, I actually get the whole icon right here. So I should just be able to copy you and paste it directly in here. I can get rid of my style, and I can get rid of you, and I don't need the ID on there. That's coming from, sorry, let's just clean that up a little bit. And let's save that. So then it's way too big, but just like last time, I added the height and width to it. So right after my view box here, we can add in a height is equal to 17, width is equal to 30. There we go. So I have my open and my close. The thing is, there's this first one here is my hamburger. So I'm going to add a class of hamburger right there. And over on this one, I'm going to add a class of close icon. Save that. So with my close icon, I don't want to see my close icon right now, right? So let's go back to here. Whoops, not here. Into my, right over here. So my nav is, I'm going to add my hamburger right here. So I have my hamburger. And what do I want to do with my hamburger? Actually, let's start with my close icon. Close icon. I want this to be display none. Whoop. So I don't have the X. When I click, though, I want it to turn on. So here inside my nav is open. My close icon will be a display of block. Good, good, good. And also when nav is opened, I want my hamburger to be a display none, because I don't want my hamburger to be there. So you can see there's the X. When I click, it's a hamburger. When I click, it goes back and forth. Now the only thing is with the display none, we can't animate that or do a transition on that, but I think it's, because everything's moving, I really don't think we're losing anything on that. I think it's fine that that one just sort of clicks over. And I think that's working really good. And there we go. Okay, so now that all of that is done, there is one last problem, and what that is right now everything looks good. This is nicely positioned. But if we do a little inspect on this, and I'm going to open up my responsive design, what we're going to see is that at the small screen sizes, I don't see my X anymore. So this is getting down to about the 320, and that's not good. So what I actually need to do is have this reposition while I'm resizing the screen. So to do that, let's jump back over to my nav.scss here. Actually, let's go back to my index. We want to be looking at my menu button. So do we have a menu button? Oh, it's just going to go in here. And basically what we want to do is inside my nav is open. We want to have so when the nav is open, the menu button will also transform. And so I'm just going to copy this. Copy, paste. Translate, I don't know how much. I'm going to start with a negative 50%. So it should be like 50% of itself. And I'll bring it down to 320. And let's do a bit more than that, 70 maybe. I want to make sure that it's easily visible, which it is. And even when I get bigger, it means it's going to stick closer to here. It won't be so far off the side. And on really big screen sizes, so if I get out of my responsive view here, and we just make that really big, it sort of sticks here. It won't be centered or anything, but I think that's fine. So it just sort of, and there we go. So, and as we can see, so this space is there, and here it's just a little bit bigger. I could put a transition on that, so it would sort of slide out and slide back in, but I really don't think it's needed. Just like when the X switches, because everything is moving, you don't really notice that it's not in the same spot. So I think I could leave it like that. But if you really prefer having something transition, you could definitely on your menu button just add a little transition on it, and then it would sort of slide into place instead of just appearing there. So as you can see, it's a really small amount of JavaScript to create something like this, which is really cool. It doesn't take a lot to do. Hopefully you're not disappointed that it wasn't a lot of JavaScript, but in not the next video, but the one after that, where we're going to make the modals work, because the next video will be the modals, and then we're going to be making the modals work. And that one is going to be a little bit more intensive and a little bit more sort of substance to it. Instead of just turning classes on and off, we're going to be having to do quite a bit more, because we're going to be animating it, because we're going to have to select the right modal to open, and then it's going to have to fade in and fade out, and it's a little bit more complicated than this one, but hopefully it's a nice little introduction to JavaScript, just keeping it nice and simple here. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Also leave a comment down below to let me know you liked it, and if you didn't like it, also leave a comment down below and let me know you didn't, because I'd like to be able to make my videos better. If you have any questions about anything I did in this one, please feel free to leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.